Okay.
Okay, good a good day wherever you are, whichever continent you're on. One of these days I'll get the invitations right. I noticed that it wasn't scheduled till tomorrow, my time, and I changed it right at the last minute. So you probably have a corrected invitation in your email right now. I wish I could get those right. Manu, how are you feeling today, and what do you intend to get out of this call?
Yeah, feeling good. Nice weather, in expectation here. I'm happy that we are 6 here, the 6 that are always there. And what I expect is that we just continue reading Grunch of Giants, but broadening, the lessons that we can have and how we can see that, how it can help us clarify all the fog that we have around currently and see further what we can do. What can a man do that could change the world? So that's my expectation. And how do you feel? What do you expect?
Yeah, thank you, Manu. Today, really happy to see everybody here. Bigger group today, and I think last week it was this whole the idea of corporations having already existed for a long time in the form of the kings and emperors and sultans of the world, right? And so I'd really like to explore that further and see what actually happens there. Yeah, as in how in today's world, what it means, what can be done about it, who has got it right, who is doing it still the ways of old, that kind of thing. And then because we always talk about corporations, we've never really looked at the royal part of it. Yeah, so that's pretty interesting for me. And so yeah, Joe, how do you feel? What do you expect takeaway today?
I feel good, and I'm looking to continue to go through Grunch of the Giants and actually pick up where we left off last week, maybe a little bit more on a positive note. Towards the end of the call, we were pretty down on everything, and I tell you, Steve and I were actually having a conversation later in the week, and we were like, thank God Ann was there to help us with our clothing, because we were distressed. Between Manu and Steve and I, our takeaways were pretty distressing. So I'm just, I'm excited about getting a little bit deeper into this book, and I'm open to whatever whatever we read next. So I'm looking forward to it. John, how do you feel? What do you
Feeling
think?
good. It's a beautiful day in Perth. I've been for a walk in my favourite park, which has tall trees over 100 years old, lots of shade by the lake, with lots of wildlife. And it's lovely. It's a great way to connect with nature and feel better about the day. We're going to have about 33 degrees today, so warm, but not 36, 38, 39. I prefer sub 30. Yeah, I'm feeling good. I've got greenery out both sides if I look out the windows. And glad to be back with you and keen to learn more about Bucky. Di and I were talking about Bucky this morning, actually, and he really said there are only two things you're supposed to do. You're supposed to solve problems and improve the lot of the people around you. That's why you're here. So that's good. Very simple philosophy. So hopefully by the end of today, I might be able to solve a problem. That's what I hope to take away. So Susan, how do you feel and what do you hope to take out of today?
Well, I feel somewhat luminous. I would turn into a 2-hour phone call with somebody right before I got on that actually is an amazing intellect and able to see patterns. And we went seamlessly from structures of government and finance and biology and speaking all the same languages across with the same sort of patterning. So I don't know that his life would ever lead him to be able to be on this call, but he's somebody that would be amazing. And I would tell you the discipline of getting together with you all has helped develop my ability to perceive and my ability to appreciate. And I want to continue to do more of that. And Steve, I think it's you. How do you feel and what would you like to get out of today?
Okay, well, I've had a great week, and I too left the call last week. Well, as Joe mentioned, the Grunch of Giants, that's a pretty big deal. So what I expect to do is continue reading the book. I'm not sure. I'm hopeful that we're going to end on a positive note tonight. I haven't read that far ahead, but I mean, there is a positive note coming up right now that we're going to start with that I think is kind of exciting. But to remind you guys, I just am looking at page 12, my PDF file, page 12 of the book. And by the way, the PDF file of this book goes out in every email every week, just in case there's somebody new who doesn't have it. But on page 12, he says the annual gross universal cash heist. That's what Grunch is. It's Grunch, Grunch. The annual gross universal cash heist pays annual dividends of over $1 trillion US. This was back in the day when he wrote this book. And so it's got to be worse right now. That's a drop in the freaking bucket. And so, but we're going to start out. When we left off last week, he'd been talking about how Goliath was around and how the big guys were beating up on the little guys. And then all of a sudden, he's shifting now to where the little guys start having some power. And we're going to pick it up right there. I notice there's a chat comment over here. Oh, yeah. Nodes are points of energy where people can meet and engage in vocational ways. Yeah, that was one of the positive big things we took out of the conversation was how schools can be more integrated, more practical for people. And I would, and it was cool that Anne got so much out of last week, and that's cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and tackle this reading. John, I hate to put you to work, but
I'm happy to do it.
All right, well, we've been reading for a couple of weeks now, and we're ready for a change.
Okay.
I think that what we want to do here is we want to start, we ended up down here. Let me see where this is, down here. Come on, let it go. There we go. Okay, I see what's going on. All right, there we go. And now I go down there. There we go. I think it's kind of good. He talks about the armor and everything. I think we should start from the top of the page to kind of put it in a little bit of a context. So even though we kind of pick up in the middle of one of his long paragraphs, that's a good place to start. John, if you want to start from
Okay, sure.
And we'll go.
Can you perhaps widen the page? That's better. Yep. So armor frequently became the champion of traveling bands of the little people. The little armored knight was more maneuverably effective than the armored giant when the latter's multi-folded weight overburdened his mount. As a special consequence of this trending, we have the non-gigantic, successfully armoured King Arthur's Round Table knights who used their mounted and armed might to rectify wrongs wrought against people by local bullies and clumsily armoured horse-mounted landowners. Arms, armour, precious stones, skins, furs, fabrics, spices, incense, hand looms, and other hand tools were the principal goods traded in Roland's time. Gold, silver, and pewter served as money. Trading was accomplished on foot, on the backs of animals, or on river-borne small craft. The land of the overlord was the principal wealth. Squads of armed horsemen could protect caravans of goods carrying horses, camels, and elephants, along with human bearers. These caravans could transport the initially culture-evolved riches of the Orient westward to the ever more westwardly advancing frontiers of humanity, where the newly powerful cultures could acquire the historically recognised appurtenances of Oriental courts of power. A new kind of wealth-making occurs historically with the invention and development of stoutly and heavily keeled, ribbed and planked, high seas keeping, deep-bellied, and in much later times cannon-armed sailing ships.
Let's pause right there and just kind of review what we've got so far. Because one of the things that's really amazing to me is how, I don't know, he just seems to have like a core. When Bucky looked at the history of the world, he really talked about it for more like a people's history of the world, and he mentions King Arthur's Knights of the Round Tables as if they were probably not fictional, but the idea that suddenly somebody was there to stand for the people. That was kind of idealistic. And I thought that was interesting. Any other comments or anything anybody else noticed along the way as we were reading there?
Well, and in this moment, he's talking about the social relationships, but at other times, one of the things I love about Bucky is he'll take a 90-degree turn and talk about accounting like we did when we looked at the charts. And he will take us to accounting by number of beaver pelts or number of pounds of sugar, or something that's a completely different look at a way to gauge what's going on in society. Like, how is that energy flowing cosmically?
Right. He's more interested in the flow of goods and services than he is who's running the show. How's it flowing? Anybody else?
The most important sentence, in my opinion, because he's telling the story, is a special consequence of this trending. The word is trending. He's telling the story of trending of evolution. And that if you were saying that he's telling which is current, how is it flowing? It is the trending of evolution. Is from big to smaller organized and more precise and more powerful.
Cool. Any other comments on
That is
that?
interesting.
I'm checking out this word Roland here because he mentions Roland. And I
Mhm.
remember we looked up Roland last time at some point, but I don't remember what we came up with Roland. Does anybody else remember what his Roland reference is?
I don't.
In addition
So
to the
Phi Phi Fum.
Roland, Chil de Roland. It almost sounds like Rothschild.
it almost does it. The legendary son of Charlemagne's sister Gillis. And this is Roland was born as Orlando Furioso. So he has this big thing about Roland in here. Anybody remember the punchline? Was he a good guy or a bad guy? He talks about the fee fi fo fum thing here, which turned into a child's fable, and maybe it was all along.
I think I just thought that it was a fable of kind of kings and noblemen. But
Yeah.
In the days of Roland,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it
And long
doesn't sound like,
before- Go ahead, Joe.
it doesn't sound positive. I mean, in the sense of that Roland could and did award best hunting and farming lands to those mounted bloodkin and military henchmen.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it doesn't exactly put together hunted their lands and had them cultivated by one foot tithe paying tenant farmers.
Yeah. So this is part of the exploitation of the people on the planet. So it's not a good reference then. Okay, cool. Nice to know.
I don't think that there is any good and bad in what he's saying. It's just the component, and this has been big on Bucky, the military.
Right.
You see the killing rate. You know, we've been engaged most of the time in killing rate with the 90-degree varying of living rate.
Right.
And what I think that he has been advocating is that you can consciously harness the living rate and start being predictive about it. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
We can consciously do what, delivery?
We can consciously now start acting in a way that enhances living rate instead of
Weaponry.
killing rate.
Yeah,
Yes.
killing or weaponry, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's talking about the transition in history of how wealth and power And I notice he gives the Chinese a lot of credit here because he says they're highly developed culture, and that this came across from the East and influencing the West, which is growing. So yeah, that's very interesting. I hope I didn't detract from your comment. Any other comments or questions?
Well,
Okay, so
I also think that your mention of Chinese is very important because they were the first to really face in a massive way the, how do you call it, the interaction with let's call it weather and the environment, and be pressed into developing methods like arithmetic, like accounting, you know, from rice culture in paddies. You know, you needed, when rice was domesticated, and if you harvest rice and if you don't put it in a granary and you don't count it properly because it's small, you know, you're going to lose it to the monsoon. So that was one of, in the stories, if you read John Campbell's stories, you know, that is one of the trends that push people to get organized in ways and putting together things, learning about things that allows, you know, betterment in the future, or to cope better with whatever the environment threw at them.
cool. Other comments or questions? So he's now transitioning from the fact that trading was accomplished on foot and on the backs of animals. And now there's a new kind of wealth-making machine coming around. So if you want to continue reading, John.
Certainly. We're talking about the ships, right?
Right.
So,
These great ships.
these great ships were built in vertical shorings. Their keels were laid upon heavy wooden cross ties and blocked against premature sliding. These cross tie ways led down very gently sloped banks into the harbour's deep waters. When the ship's hull was completed and watertight, the cross tie ways were greased and the blockings mauled out from under the ship. Gravity slid the ship swiftly seaward, maintaining its vertical balance long enough to plunge in deck side skyward into the water.
I just want to comment. Here he is looking at sea trade, and he's looking at it from an engineering standpoint of the design used in getting the ships from the docks into the water. I just think that's so uniquely Bucky, right? Yeah. Okay. Any
That's
other?
a good point.
Huh?
No, it's a great point. It's a great point. It's the way he looks at the world.
Yeah.
But do you see what I put in there in the comment?
No.
What do you think about it?
Well, let's take a look at that.
Raptors to ships via land.
Do you see how that closes or that complexifies? If you look at Bucky's theory, he say from the reefs, you have people from sea seeing the mountain and then crossing the ocean to be on land. That was what they were looking for, in search of fresh water and all these things to survive. So from islands to land, and then on land, you have all of this flora of development. People house mounted, you know, like giants, armored, host mounted people, and then knives and everything. And then you have a veering from that old rafter. They start putting keels and then developing, you know, ships.
Yeah.
And then ship will take you to more land And more land will take you to more ship, to air, to all of these things happening.
Yeah. And like Europe didn't want all that wealth from China to go through Persia. Europe wanted to
No.
go west across the water. Even if they're going to fall off the end of the planet, they were going to go west to get first-hand contact with that the Asian wealth, you know. And yeah,
My point here, Steve, is that Europe is not relevant. Europe is just part of local steering of things. He's
exactly.
talking about our evolution on this spaceship,
Right.
Earth. And it's again, you can see that it is the universality of Bucky.
Right.
That's what he was.
Totally.
So one of the movement patterns is tidal. So land, water, land, water, land, water. So just kind of like a beating heart, tidal ocean. It's just one of the movement patterns. And so usually what Bucky's really great at is to take us through some of these different in, out, orbiting, torquing.
Yeah.
But eventually we get to precession.
Yeah. And probably that's what he's talking about here is the precession of, of human development, economic development. Yeah. We're going to read more about that here too, I think. Go ahead, John, if you care to.
After launching, the ship was floated progressively into a succession of wooden, crane-equipped outfitting docks, the interior decks and bulkheading dock, the chain plating dock, the mast stepping dock, the rigging and sail bending on dock, the winch, capstan and armaments installing dock. Finally, she sailed away to various lands where superior masts, fabrics, ropes, etc., progressively replaced the original make-do equipment. World's best masks from the Pacific coast of British Columbia, best rope-making fibre from Manila in the Philippine Islands, best cotton fibre for the sails from Egypt, best teak wood for the decks from Thailand. It took complete circumnavigation to incorporate the best in the world of everything to produce a gallant ship, one capable of round-the-world sailing. It's probable that the first moving line shipyard in history was established on the Chao Phraya River in Bangkok. However...
Oh, crap, sorry. I was trying to give you more to read. Go ahead. Bangkok.
Yeah, okay. However, the earliest now known militarily secure shipyard is to be found on the Greek island of Milos. It is in a miniature rock-walled fjord, well hidden from enemies by a deep-channeled, curved entrance. On the many rock platforms lining the fjord's walls, many shipbuilding artifacts were found. The Milos shipbuilding fjord was so well hidden that the Germans used it for their Aegean Sea submarine hideaway during World War II. The Venus de Milo, now in the Louvre in Paris, came from Milos. History's next great moving line shipyard is as yet to be found in Venice. So strategically important was the Venice shipyard that it was initially seized by Napoleon early in his campaigning. Centuries later, this progressively moved forward and added to shipbuilding pattern, as yet clearly evidenced in the Venice shipyard, became the prototype of all of mass production industry's moving lines. The ship was, of course, a tool, but not a craft tool produced by one man. It was an industrial tool, mass producible and operable only by large numbers of highly skilled craftsmen, metalworkers, woodworkers, sailcloth makers, rope makers, iron chain. Where did you go to?
My mouse is being really jumpy, and I'm just trying to honor the
and you have this roll-in thing up. Like, I don't know if everybody else.
I do, and it's in everybody's way, and I apologize. I thought I took it down and forgot. And I'm so worried about my cursor and the and John's reading. I just hate blowing it away.
Well, Roland's still there, so let's get rid of Roland.
Well, he'll be gone in a second.
Roland's gone, yes, okay. Now we were up to,
Oh my gosh.
it's all right, we'll find it.
Thank you for your patience.
Oh, hang on. We need to go,
Roll
Down.
around sailing Manila. Okay, this is the one where we ended on.
Yeah,
So here we
next
go.
page.
Then there's the Germans. Okay.
Okay. The ship was, of course, not a tool, but a craft tool produced by one man. It was an industrial tool, mass producible and operable only by large numbers of highly skilled craftsmen, metal workers, woodworkers, sailcloth makers, rope makers, iron chain and anchor makers, seasoned sailors, and the coordinated muscle of all hands. The merchant ship was a wind-energized industry, a tool that could sail around the world and carry cargoes worth many fortunes to lands not containing the materials brought by the ships, which, when integrated with the home port occurring materials, produced real wealth of increased life support for more and more people. The building, rigging and arming of such vessels and the production of the materials with which to build them, as well as the production of the food and other necessities to feed and clothe all those engaged in the shipbuilding, required an effectively powerful military authority able to command the full-time commitment of the work and skills of the large numbers of humans involved. It also called for the amassing of large sums of negotiable wealth. Preferably, the negotiable wealth was in the form of trade implementing precious metals and jewels commercially acceptable around the world. For ages earlier, the negotiable wealth had been the effectively demonstrable products of labour and its produce. The grains, where did we just go to?
Yeah, way up there. I think that's.
Yeah, I've got it. Mass-produced cattle constituted the most concentrated possible yet manoeuvrable realisation of actual life support wealth. Cattle were put up as collateral for the banker's loan of gold, silver and copper coinage. When the voyage was successfully completed, the merchant ship venturers repaid the banker and paid the banker his interest in the form of calves that had been interimly produced by the collateraled cattle. This was called payment in kind, kind being the kinder or children of the cattle. When bankers eliminated live cattle as collateral and dealt only in gold and silver, there were no gold coins being bred by gold coins as calves had been by cows. So interest was taken out of the capital gold by diminishing the equity of the borrower when he repaid his debt. The banker's interest was cut out of, that is deducted from, the depositor's original cap ital, head of cattle, stake. As I made clear in operating manual for Spaceship Earth, when the farmer or cattleman produces of real wealth of 100 forward days of life support each for 100 people, that is 1,000 man days of life support, deposited their monetary specie equivalent in the bank, and the banker loaned it out at 10%. It meant that the banker stole 100 man days of life support from the farmer depositor instead of providing the farmers the bank advertised safekeeping. The banker could hide this situation by price increase in the profits the banks made by using the depositor's real wealth units, but the depositor's dollar could buy him ever less real life support units. The safe return of the merchant venturers' ships was so unpredictable as to constitute a capital investment of high risk, but also of very high potential gain. Most significantly, a risk whose rewarding payoff might take several crop seasons to realise. The voyage might take several or even many years to complete. The risks in turn could be lessened by insurance. As a consequence,
let's pause there for a second. Any thoughts? Or he's bringing up insurance.
He's giving you the evolution of a market.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, this is what it boils down to, and how energy can be extracted out of the system itself.
Well, the other thing
I'm sorry.
no, keep going, Joe.
Oh, no, I'm done. I'm done.
But it's just when they were using the natural, the alive goods, the cattle, there was this nature provided the what's left over. Nature provided the profit by the in-kind acceleration of the assets. And when we did our typical reductionist thing, hey, instead of, you know, cows and pigs, let's use a piece of a rock, you know, gold or silver or some precious stone that doesn't in and of its own create any additional value. Then we got into the point where it's going to be we've now created a downward spiral in that system instead of the upward spiral that was there with the live capital.
Now that's an interesting concept, Susan. I didn't see that as you're reading it, but I did make a note that the in kind comes from the German word Kinder. That's where we get kindergarten from. Das Kind is the child. Kinder are the children. And you're very astute, Susan. While I noted that word and how the etymology of the word, you were noting how it functioned, that the interest was paid by the increase created by the natural resource they were using. And I think you're pointing out that as they shifted from cattle to other things, profit had to come some other way.
Right, and it's not that one is right and the other is wrong. It's just that when we work with nature, nature is amazingly efficient and nature is regenerative and abundant.
Yeah.
And so when we when we come along and put in reductionist and derivative systems, we rob ourselves of some of the natural wealth.
Right.
We've made other things out of it for sure, but
last week at the end of the call, one of the reasons why it was so depressing, we focused on the cobalt mines in Africa, how they're getting their wealth by having young children and just poverty-stricken people, basically one step above slavery, to produce that wealth. Instead of just letting the cattle have their offspring, there's something else going on here. I'm so glad you brought that up.
But I think I don't know, I'm keeping myself from being emotional here. Not for the reasons of last week, but from the educational point of view.
Yeah.
I mean, Joe, you study economics, right?
Yes.
Okay. But if economics were if you were ever exposed to economics in the way that this story is being told.
Oh yeah, we're not.
What will the outcome be? How will you think?
It would change. It would change everything that people thought about modern finance. Essentially, I mean, you know, just sometimes people in general, they don't understand the element of nature when it comes to economics.
The regenerative nature of the regenerative element in nature as they understand economics.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, you're taught economics one way. You're taught to analyze a system that already exists.
And to maximize the profit.
But do you really believe that central bankers today understand this?
Central bankers are what?
Understanding.
Or the high finance guys, do you think they understand this? I don't know, I'm just asking the question.
No.
Maybe some, not enough to change anything.
Yeah. And maybe I'm a pessimist, but I think current methods of attaining profit and maximizing shareholder value is just being so manipulated that all the emphasis is on the manipulation. It's not on actual nature of, it's not on the well-being of the planet or the well-being of the people in the planet, on the planet.
Some misaligned incentives for sure.
And it's, so what I think what we're seeing is, when I think what Manu is pointing at is that this is an origin story. And when you start to see the deficit that then moves forward and spirals into the future, all of our current economic models only work with continued growth, continued debt.
Mhm.
They're predicated on debt. So and it's not like I have a fully worked out understanding of all this, but I think at some moment what we learned in COVID, like what was shown in our country, was as much as you heard that the powers that be thought that everybody should be working and more productive, and but as soon as the engines of the economy started to slow down, what they did to avoid a huge panic was to just start sending money out, so people would just keep the money supply expanded, so that people would keep growing in their demands of what they were doing monetarily.
Yeah.
Okay, I also have something to add here, because I'm seeing this right now, going through, because our school is going through a fundraising process, yeah. And so now I'm getting, lawyers are coming in, people from the financial world is coming in to like looking into everything that we're doing, right? And I realized that, because for many years I've realized that the whole financial system was literally based on the way men have been doing businesses for a long time, right? So for women, it's tougher, because it has nothing to do with any discrimination or anything. It's just the way the whole nature of, or the whole history of how businesses have been done, right? And I find it's really difficult for women to get funding, all because I don't know whether I've spoken about this in this group, all because we are about maybe a couple of 100 years behind the men doing business. And I think my generation is the first one where we could be anything and run businesses, because my mom's generation, they were still teachers, nurses, and secretaries, So then I reflected, because a lot of my peers, the women, I come from a convent school, right? So the convent girls or women, like now that we are all at retiring age and so on, they achieved great heights in the corporate world, in whatever field they're in, but not many in business. And because I also went to the all boys school for my pre-U, I met up with a lot of them, and many of them are business owners, right? So it got me thinking that it's easier for them to get, because they already understand what is available out there to invest, and the businesses have gone so far forward in engineering, in IT, and so on. So when you really look at women's industries, we are doing what we are interested in, which is like education or childcare or kindergartens, or food-based industries, and or fashion and pedicure and manicure and maybe water filtering system. But so who's going to actually invest in another, say, education group, when you have the likes of all this technology stuff, which will provide a whole lot more, and you can 3x, 4x a whole lot faster than maybe education, because our ROI takes about 5 years to 6 years to realize. So now coming back to I'm linking this with what we are talking about today, because it's really hard to, when you want to do something like what Bucky is talking about, right, to make it for the people and so on, right? Because, like, say for instance, even in the school, I pay my teachers very, very high, right? Because I'm bringing engineers in and all that. So we are higher than market rate. And so when people keep looking at our teachers' pay or our staff salary, it's very high in comparison to maybe other schools. Then there is also the cost of innovation, right? And we are literally taking on the role of and the government's job, right? And the governments are supposed to be funding all these things. But here we have a bunch of teachers doing that. So I'm also, because of this, our meetings every Sunday, I'm now looking at what is now that high seas that people cannot regulate. Okay. So we were exploring using NFTs to fund. And I'm not talking, this is based on use cases and utilities. And it's not about basing it on the value of the painting or the product that's being provided, right? So anyway, I'm just sharing this because yes, this for me, it's been a sticking point for me, the way the funding is done, right? And so we are looking at other ways instead, yeah. And looking at the high seas where the regulation cannot come in at the moment because it's just too new. Okay. So yeah, I think I'm complete there.
And my wife spent a lot of time working in Taiwan, China, Malaysia, Singapore. And from my traveling with her and dealings with her, my perception was there were many very successful, very wealthy businesswomen in Malaysia.
Yes.
Some I know of huge businesses, not just in the areas you've mentioned, armoured cars, security, all sorts of businesses. And a lot of them were very wealthy and very powerful. Certainly, I think it's been difficult for Western women in some situations, but not in others, to get the finance that's been more available to males. But in my experience, the whole financing is changing. There are more micro funders. There are more alternate funders. One of my clients built a large high-rise development in the city, didn't go to a bank, he went to a superannuation fund because they're flush with money. He said, you put in the capital, I'll design and build, and I'll fill it with high-quality tenants. You own half, I own half, and I'll give you the option to buy my half if you want to when we complete. He didn't have to go to a bank. He had a partner in the development who had unlimited cash, a superannuation fund. And at the end of the day, it all proceeded as he planned. He built it, he filled it with good tenants, and the superannuation fund bought him out. So that's just one example. I'm regularly dealing with for litigation funding, we have some very interesting alternatives to banks or traditional financiers. So it seems to me one of the things that technology is doing is, in time, it hasn't happened yet, but breaking the stranglehold of the banks. But there's a very comfortable and cozy arrangement between the banks and the governments. And if you look at, 2008 and what happened there, and you look at the end consequences for some of the culprits on Wall Street, very few were punished. Most of them have wound up as well off or better off. The governments are back into, cooperating. Perhaps are unkinder words. So this whole thing about finance is interesting because I think that eventually, the government's now trying to pass laws. Every time there's a major incident, such as September 11, that gave governments great powers to pass extra laws based on the threat of terrorism to find out more information about more people and to monitor what people were doing. The recent challenges with cryptocurrencies has given the governments more excuse to pass laws that will try and take control of that, because cryptocurrencies ultimately represent a threat to the banks and to government. So it is this same thing. The history, we've been reading what Bucky said. There's a book called The Sovereign Individual, written by two very, very intelligent Englishmen, one of them a lord, who are currently based in the Bahamas, and very wealthy gentlemen. But they traced the history of the sovereign individual. They said that in England, particularly in the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, the small farmer was at risk of bands of armed marauders. And one of the organisations that had large armies was the church. The church used to maintain substantial armies, and the church would then go to the landholder and say, we can protect you from these armed marauders. You give your land to us. You are allowed to farm it. We will protect you against the armed marauders. So the church in the Dark Ages or Middle Ages used its armed forces to compulsorily acquire, I mean, you had the choice whether you gave it to them or not, the land of small farmers on the basis they would provide protection. I think that's a bit the way some of the mobs work, isn't it?
That is
Absolutely.
exactly, I was about to say the same thing.
Yep.
So
It-
the history
It
of
is
power
very
and crime.
interesting in the how much storytelling is important. Another thing
Yeah.
that I got from John's comment is that, he used the word, dark ages. And dark ages was in the West, and in the East, it was actually, the height
Yeah,
of everything, in terms
Right.
of, yeah.
China, Egypt, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The third thing that I got here, and that to me is a kind of recomfort, and if we understood what it is you mentioned NFTs. NFT become the problem where people want to substitute it for global stuff. But it's a good tool for local, for you guys, let's just learn from those that are, say, between quote, successful. Are you ever seen a hedge fund or a venture capitalist or industrialist or big guys that are there coming in public raising money for a project? Never. They have clubs, right? They have clubs of like-minded with means that put together results when a good story is told. If a story is told and is convincing, that is it. So in your case, I agree with you. Use the NFTs. It's just a token. And it is a utility token for like-minded to get into this project in expectation for something and really get into it with heart. It's going to be very difficult to convince the banker, to convince whoever, right, that is in what is so-called public institutions to support your project. Otherwise, they're going to support it in a very, very expensive way, sometimes even at your expense. So that's what my comment into it. There are tools that can be used, and the effectiveness of it depends on the context that you set, the boundary condition that you set for it to be effective.
Thank you, Manu. Yeah.
I want to comment on John's remark. In real estate, I've been doing real estate consulting for the last 10 years, maybe 12 years. What I've helped people do is joint venture. John mentioned the democratization, I think. He didn't say these words, but John, you mentioned the fact that the bankers are losing their strict control, that gradually there are other ways like GoFundMe, and there are other ways that we can do crowdfunding, but state laws have to facilitate or regulate that. And if Wayne Palmer were on the call here, he would give you a story about what happens when the SEC gets mad when somebody is doing too good of a job locally, right? If they start making the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US, will come in and jump all over them. So, but the joint venture is really cool. If you got a guy with a chunk of money and you got a guy with a project, you stick the two together and you can avoid all the fun. You have to maintain, scrupulous standards. At least it's advisable to do that, but you avoid all the SEC regulations and bank and funding things. And so that's kind of interesting. And I think that, if we remember back in the 60s, cybernetics was a big thing that came out, and IBM and all the big companies were like building these computers to cyberneticize and control the world. Well, all of a sudden, then the people got PCs. Suddenly now I've got this thing on my desk that's more powerful than what IBM had in the 60s, more powerful than what got people to the moon. And so there's this democratization that's hope. That's the big hope, is that individuals like Anne, like you, like me, will do something to make a difference, and hopefully we won't get trounced on by the giants,
It's hard to upend the financial system. I'll just say that.
Mm.
I mean, I've looked very closely even at microfinance options, and that there's mixed results with that.
Yeah.
Even some of the online lending that was kind of directly done, actually it was indirectly backed by the banks
Yeah.
for small businesses.
Yeah.
And I still have, when I think of one of the things that I do like about finance is I do like community banks.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think that those are actually very good institutions. They understand the local market and the
Right.
needs of the customers in that market, and they're being eradicated. So they've been eradicated since the 80s, really.
Yeah.
And they're incapable of keeping up technologically. And actually, they are the primary source of funding for small businesses.
Yeah.
Which is the actual major employer in the United States.
Yeah. Small business.
So, yeah, so I think that there's that element of it, that the banks themselves, there may be a different way of banking that may be effective. It's like, and I'm just saying, community banks, things like that are probably a little bit more interested in the community versus, huge institutions. That's all.
That bank crash, we had a savings and loan debacle. That's what it's called. The savings
Right.
and loan debacle in the 80s, which was created by Wall Street. That lobby just went into Congress and changed all the laws and basically ripped all the guts out of state chartered banks. And so anything over a certain thing had to be supervised by Wall Street. And so
Right.
7,000 savings and loans went bankrupt. There's still community, like I'm part of it. I got rid of my NA bank accounts, and I'm in all credit unions, which are owned by the people who deposit them, but they're still regulated and limited by the federal legislation in order to keep them in line.
They kill it indirectly too. They even kill it through what was it? The one very expensive piece of legislation was essentially after 9/11 to call the Know Your Customer rule, which essentially forced you to trace your money all the way through, money that was coming through your bank, essentially. So this was a huge cost for small institutions.
Yeah.
And that created a whole set of software for individuals to come up with, but that's an expense to the community bank.
Right.
So yeah, that was like something that was snuck in under the Patriot Act.
Yeah.
So, these are things that it's not even directly like a Dodd-Frank bill that gets in, that's financial legislation that actually destroys the smaller institutions. It's other bills that have little requirements that ultimately have a massive impact on an industry.
Yeah. It'd be fun to get into Dodd-Frank because that was supposed to be the bill to restore the law that was let go of before the crash in the 1920s. Dodd-Frank was supposed to come back in and restore some sanity, but it just didn't do it. It was written by the bankers.
It did nothing.
It did nothing.
Yeah.
It was written by the bankers. And John, you said hardly any banker has gone to jail over that fiasco in 2008. I don't think anyone has. I don't think there's been any criminal consequence for anything that went on.
There might have been one or two. There were very, very few.
And
I remember one of
let me share this one. Do you really think that the Dodd-Frank will have done anything after the Glass-Steagall was removed?
that's exactly, it was to replace Glass-Steagall.
Right, yeah.
Secondly, which of Dodd or Frank was at the end of his career?
Dodd.
Okay.
Frank's not
So you
around.
really think that, you know,
Either
like-
Frank's not around either. Yeah.
Yeah.
okay, so you see what is happening is always if at the higher or a macro level, there is something, and then people are inside, it doesn't fit them anymore, they break it, right? But they break it, and those who are actually trying to help or thinking otherwise, either they learn it with being inside for a long time to learn what's going on, or they play safe by preserving their position as insider and only acting according to their conscience when they are ready to retire.
Mm.
And this makes things very complicated. So our own interests vis-a-vis the role that we play, because we have been voted by people to be put in those conditions to look after the interest. What I'm saying interest here is the rules that are fair to the whole community.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about interest individual, but to say that the rules of the game are fair. And it becomes a very complicated and complex thing that espouses politics, basically, and become violent.
And because the
And-
Dodd-Frank didn't reinstate any of the Glass-Steagall provisions, banks right now can buy commodities and hold the commodities.
But
So
they have been,
and this is
Steve,
the
what,
right
what they
now.
have done, I just learned this recently. Joe, you will tell us, is that in the accounting of banks,
Yeah.
when you put your deposit actually was your asset.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What they have done is that they are subclass your deposit
Yeah.
to appropriate. In other words, when Susan, you come into a bank, you make a deposit, that money is no more yours.
Mm.
You don't have claim onto it. It is written into a sub account, which account belongs to the bank. So it becomes a very, essential asset of a bank, and with which they can take to go and speculate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
See how
exactly.
So they
I
have
want-
broken a Glass-Steagall.
Yeah. I want to finish.
They have, yeah.
Because right now, these banks now have created these huge hedge funds that since 2008, when they created the crash, the hedge funds went out and started buying the real estate. And so individual investors are competing with hedge funds. The hedge funds will pay more money than it's worth. So individual buyers have to step up and compete with hedge funds. And that's the reason why there's a rental shortage in America today, because the hedge funds bought up all the real estate. They're continuing to compete with private investors, and they inflate the market because they're willing to buy it on a 10-year holding plan. They don't care. Whereas a normal investor has to make a reasonable amount of profit over, in a relatively short term, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. These guys don't care. Any other comments?
Yeah.
And
No,
go ahead, Joe.
no. I mean, I lost my train of thought, actually, to be quite honest. But it'll come back to me as well.
Good. When it does, holler out. And as we go back to the reading, I just want to point out what Susan pointed out was this idea that, here's by royal prerogative, the venture financing riskers could not be held liable for any losses in the venture. The shareholders held absolutely no blame in any loss of an investor. And the banks continued to collect the life support producing lands and their cattle, we already mentioned in kind, as collateral. So the banks are taking the regenerative resources on the planet, they're isolating those, and evidently from what Manu says, even our individual deposits in the bank, they're claiming those and then manipulating the system to maximize their profits. So, wow. Any other comments or questions? Do you remember where we are? Do you remember where we are, John?
Just 1 second. Back up above this.
Okay, good.
Keep going up.
By royal prerogative.
Yeah.
No, keep going up a little bit more. Hang on a second.
Hang on. Jeez.
Stop.
Well,
Um,
I think I was there before. It's below the Germans.
yeah, sorry, yes. So the Germans used it for their submarine hideaway. Yes. Venice, we talked about Venice, centuries. Hang on. Go back up a fraction.
Okay.
This is where we were. At the bottom of this, the depositor original capital head. That's where we were.
No.
Yeah.
Yes, we were there.
We were
Yep,
to continue as a maid. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where we were. We were to continue on this as a maid, Claire.
Okay.
Well, and
The
let's
safe return.
I love the way he did the etymology on the word cap, the head of the cattle.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, John. Sorry. I interrupted.
Yeah, we'll pass this.
We were even past as I made clear.
Yep.
Okay.
Or no, or did I just read this? Maybe I didn't read that loud. Hang on. Have I
We
read this
read
out?
operating minute.
Okay.
I think we read, yeah, as I made clear in operating manual spaceship Earth. I think I remember that line.
Yeah.
Really?
Good place.
Well, maybe I've just read it. That's the problem. Anyway,
Well, let's start there.
as I
Yeah,
made
we've-
clear in operating manual for Spaceship Earth, when the farmer or cattleman produces of real wealth of 100 forward days of life support each for 100 people, that is 1,000 man days of life support, deposited their monetary specie equivalent in the bank, and the banker loaned it out at 10%, it meant that the banker stole 100 man days of life support from the farmer depositor instead of providing the farmers.
The bank advertised safekeeping.
Steve,
The bank hasn't moved. The bank advertised safekeeping. The banker could hide this situation by pricing.
Hang on, here it comes again. There's such a delay in what I'm showing you and what you're seeing. Go ahead.
The banker could hide this situation by price increase in the profits the bank made by using the depositor's real wealth units. But the depositor's dollar could buy him even less real life support units. The safe return of the merchant venturer's ships was so unpredictable as to constitute a capital investment of high risk, but also a very high potential gain. Most significantly, a risk whose rewarding payoff might take several crop seasons to realise. The voyage might take several or even many years to complete. These risks, in turn, could be lessened by insurance.
I'd like to comment on insurance.
Yep.
Do you know where insurance? I've read, because I used to sell Art Williams insurance, and I studied a little bit about the origins of insurance. Insurance came from the days of in the Greeks and the Romans, when the fishermen went out to fish. They would throw extra money in the pot. So when it was very dangerous, and a lot of guys didn't come back. So when the ships came back and the guys weren't there, the families of the people who didn't come back would take that money. And that was kind of a cooperative thing where the community kind of took care of themselves. And then the banking industry took it over and made an industry out of it. And it's part of the big heist. This whole
Again, I think the insurance originated with the wealthy, things like Lloyd's of London.
Yeah.
Those with money would underwrite,
right,
provide insurance and take a premium for the insurance.
Right.
But originally, I think it was wealthy individuals through a cooperative such as Lloyd's of London.
Well, I'm saying prior to Lloyd's of London even being around, it was when the medieval days when the fishermen would go out, they would share and take a community responsibility to make sure that everybody made it okay. And then it started to become a business, is my point. I don't have. Go ahead.
Does anybody have a good book or even resource? I mean, it could be a video on the history and origins of insurance. I mean, I guess the history of money is probably one way to start, but
I'm sure there's got to be history of insurance. I studied it with Art Williams back in the 80s, early 80s. And that was the story I used to tell about where insurance came from. And that's, of course, was the story they used to help justify, and that's why they said buy term insurance instead of cash value insurance.
My point is that they are brothers and sisters. You can't study one without the other. Really, it is just, I put it there, military, insurance, protectors, bouncers, all of these are children of the same thing. Cool. It is the same. It's the same. You really want to understand, that's the way Bucky is explaining things, is storytelling. It will be very difficult to take one and just tell a story. They are intertwined.
Yeah.
So you have to take a story, tell a story of life, in a way that makes it transparent. That's the way, practically, people have to make arrangements for that so that they can survive forward. They can make it forward. I mean, if you have a nightclub, even nowadays in some places, that is successful, very quickly, there are going to be guys coming in there to tell you that you need protection. And if you don't pay for protection, you'll see what will happen to you. Yeah. The same story of a church and you know, the clergy and the peasants and the farmers. They are marauding bands. What is organization force that can be effective in stopping? And it doesn't come for free. You have to pay something. That is insurance. Yeah. You don't pay, because insurance say you don't pay and it happens, you are wrecked. That's the crude definition of it. But if you pay and it happens, either somebody pays for you, reparation, or somebody fight it so that it doesn't happen. Military. In every case, you have to pay tax, insurance. All of this is all children of the same thing. We need locally protection to succeed. Into what? Because there are a floration of things, of people playing, or group that don't understand each other. If we understood the game in which we were, as that we are citizens and we are dwellers of the same planet, Earth, then it will be different. The reality is that we don't.
Cool.
All right, should we go on?
Yeah, let's go on.
I agree. No, I agree with you.
As a consequence of all the foregoing, a half millennium after Roland, a new and overwhelmingly greater form of invisible seagoing and land-strutting giants appeared on planet Earth. This was a legally contrived, abstract giant, legal because the physically uncontradictable Top's word king decreed it was legal, having the most favoured privileges accorded real humans. The giant, abstract, corporate man is inventively created in 1390 in England. The corporate human may have been invented in ancient Babylon to cover the potentate's voyaging venture, but as yet we have no written record of such. His abstract name is the Merchant Venturers Society. This composite man was formed by the King of England with a small group of his very powerful friends who lorded over their king-deeded vast lands. By royal prerogative, the venture financing riskers could not be held liable for any losses of the venture. With limited liability, individuals might sue the company, but not the human individuals who underwrote the venture. If the enterprise failed and went bankrupt, its shareholders lost their ventured stake, but were not to be held responsible in any way for its debts. The creditors of the company were the losers and not the shareholders. Bankruptcy could reflect no credit stigma upon the company's shareholders. The shareholders were held absolutely blameless for any misfortunes of the ship's crew or for damage caused by collision of their ship with another ship. If the ship and its cargo were lost, the shareholders lost their original shares, but no more. As long as the ship operated successfully, the shareholders shared its trading profits. Whether the ship was lost or not, the banker who loaned the gold for the merchant ships trading held the life support producing lands and their capital as collateral. Since many voyages ended in disaster, the banker occupied a long time steadily profitable position in the overall merchant venturing, and as yet does. Naturally, the shareholders' limited liability advantage granted by sovereign decree encouraged a swift expansion of such limit.
Want to continue? Everybody ready to continue?
Yeah, let's continue.
Yes. So I think naturally the shareholders' limited liability advantage granted by sovereign decree encouraged a swift expansion of such enterprises. In 1522, Magellan's ship demonstrated that the world is not a laterally extended plain off the edge of which a ship might plunge, nor an ocean extended laterally to infinity from which there was no return. Magellan's ship circumvoyaging proved that the Earth is a sphere, a closed system with enormous trade monopolising potentials. Laws of the land could not be enforced on the sea. The seagoers were outlaws, privateers or pirateers. The most powerful outlaws became the sovereigns of the ocean sea. In 1580, Queen Elizabeth was the largest shareholder in Sir Francis Drake's merchant ship, the Golden Hind. Naturally, the Queen granted Drake's venture legal freedom from liability.
Hang on. Keeping the word after in mind. Boy, what just happened? There we go.
You went too far. Yeah.
Yeah,
There you go. No, there you go again.
Hang on. This, I don't know why my cursor is so touchy.
Hmm.
I'm moving back up. Wow.
I don't know where you are now.
Hang on.
Oh, there
Just
is,
here it is. Well, you were there.
yeah, paying.
Just up.
Here we
Just
go.
up.
So here it is, after
Just.
paying.
Paying Elizabeth her conspicuously major share. Drake and his other shareholders each realised almost 5,000% profit on their risk capital. Enthusiastic over her Golden Hind venture, in 1600, Queen Elizabeth chartered the limited liability East India Company. This time, the shareholders acquired shares in a fleet of ships, docks and warehouses in both England and India, not shares in just one ship as in the earlier venturing. Employing her sovereign power, Elizabeth limited the losses of its chartered riskers to their initial monetary or equivalent capital stakes, while continuing their right to receive their proportional profit dividends for as long as the venturing company might exist, in perpetuity. Known later in England as limited, for limited liability, in France as Société en Commandantite, in Germany as Kommanditgesellschaft, or as corporation under the USA's Inc. for incorporated status, this newborn abstract legal giant was to be treated as a human personality, empowered to do anything humans could do, but also accredited to operate as an abstract legal entity able to enter or leave any nation without a passport. As such, it was able to employ millions of people and any amount of money, tools, buildings and equipment, and to perform its giant acts anywhere about the oceanic world exclusively for the profit in perpetuity only of its shareholders. When the 14th Amendment to the USA Constitution was passed in the post-Civil War.
Okay, hang on. Sorry.
Sorry.
There it is.
So when we're talking about it in the sense of that there's no end date,
That's right.
right? Okay.
Well.
There it is, when the 14th Amendment, right at the
Okay.
bottom. Let me do what I can to bring it up into vogue here. I do not know why my cursor is so, it's like, it's electrified.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. When the 14th Amendment to the USA Constitution was passed, post-Civil War railroad expansion days, the US Supreme Court required that the individual states grant the corporation all the privileges and protection granted to human citizens. 100 years later, in 1980, the US Supreme Court ruled that a corporation had the same rights of free speech as all US citizens. To allow its corporate bodies to make a colossal new grab, Grunch has ordered its pet puppets to take over the world ocean bottom resources. As of February 1982, the United States, Britain, France, and West Germany have reached preliminary agreement to bypass the stalled Law of the Sea conference and to proceed with the development of seabed mineral resources. The Japanese Foreign Ministry said Japan expressed opposition to the agreement, unconfirmed by the 4 other countries, and said such a program should operate under UN auspices. The United States and other developed countries have refused to agree to developing nations' demands that seabed development be overseen by a UN agency.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That should be dominated.
Oh,
Hang on,
Steve.
I think it's up there.
Yeah, yes.
Dominated by the poorer countries. The 14th, 15th, and 16th century rulers who instituted and empowered those.
Hang on, here it comes. You should see it.
Abstract corporate giants were able to popularize their acts by celebrating the visual wealth of goods it brought to their country and to the political satisfaction of their many citizens. The profit to society was visibly distributed as the goods, services, museums, and public place rarities the enterprising produced. The shareholders' dividend checks were invisibly distributed. With the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, the risk capital powers backing the British Empire became the sovereigns of the oceans. Until that time, the high sea venturers had carried gold and silver as their trading medium. This induced world-around high seas piracy. The behind-the-scenes masters of the British Empire then invented the annual balance of trade as a world-around bookkeeping system, which kept its gold off the seas and instead, after the year-end tallying of the trade transactions, transferred the gold from one country's London vault to another country's London vault. This withdrew the gold from the seagoing pirates' reach. However, it brought many of the pirates into the financial districts of great cities, too true. Naturally, shareholding in limited enterprise became increasingly attractive as an investment risk, but soon the monetary size of investment required for share participation grew beyond the acquisition means of all but the wealthy. Stock exchange brokers, for their own convenience, imposed trading only in 100-share lots or blocks, which quickly raised the equity purchasing increments to so great a price that only the very wealthy could any longer participate in such venture sharing. The capital gains playing rules keep the pikers out, the original pikers being the on-foot pike-bearing castle guards.
Ah,
In
that's
the
interesting. I love the way he tackles the etymology of these words.
In the 19th century, the limited liability corporate venturing began not only putting its shipyard donkey engines, steam engines in ships, but also mounting them on steel wheels on rails and powering them out of the shipyards. Thus, they began railroading heavy loads inland. This initiated new mass production industry centres at inland water power sites. For instance, industrial venturing underwrote water wheel-driven mass yardage cotton mill fabric production, preferably in such low wage-paying countries as India. The annual balance of trade accounting brought about many obviously inequitable economic conditions, such as, for instance, India's burlap bag makers working for a penny a day. It was the vast profits made on burlap bags so produced which financed the early 20th century expansion of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the USA. Such cotton and woolen fabric production venturing was logically followed by thread and needles, pins, buttons, and small hardware mass production moving line ventures. With the introduction of electricity and the electricity-driven motor, industries began moving line mass production of dollar watches, tin cans, safety razor blades, big city clothing production, sweatshops, then bicycles, then motor cars. In World War I, it introduced steel steamship mass production. In World War II, transoceanic aircraft mass production, and in the cold puppet nation waged war, World War III, extraterrestrial travel and transport and mass production of invisible mass killing potential. There is a fundamental evolutionary patterning in which, with each new era and phase of technology and social economic venturing, both the tools and their products get bigger and bigger, and the numbers of humans involved multiplies. A period of doing more with more until a mammoth peak magnitude is attained, which is followed by evolutionary production of ever more effective results with ever less pounds of material, ergs of energy, and seconds of time, all of which integrating synergy produces ever more comprehensively effective tools with ever smaller technological artifacts produced by ever fewer unskilled human workers. The 1985 to 1992 Model T, waxing to the 1960s Cadillac limo, then waning to the 1980 Japanese Honda.
That's
Okay, let's pause
interesting.
there.
Yeah, let's pause there. I mean, because that's the opposite of doing more
That's
with
right.
more. It's the
Yes,
opposite
it's,
of ephemeralization.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's expanding and contracting. You're right, Susan.
And this is Manu's going into multiple divisions
Right.
and then integrating back in.
Yeah, that's an important line. I'd actually not seen him use that line before. That we've gone through a period of doing more with more.
No, but you are doing more with less.
First, you do more with more.
Right. First,
No, it's more with less.
Well, he says more with more, then he says more with less pounds of material, ergs, and
Yes, the cost is less, but you're doing more.
well,
I mean,
he
when
says
you read, there is a fundamental evolutionary pattern in which, with each new era and phase of technology and social economic venturing, both the tools and their products get bigger. If the
Right.
tool is not one tool, it's a system of tools. It gets bigger.
yeah, and that's what
And
he
the
says
product,
here,
yes.
a period of doing more with more.
Yeah, but he's talking about how evolve. It's not continuous stuff. You do more with more, and then it breaks because there's a change in the yes.
yeah, exactly. You initially start doing more with more.
Yeah. There's a change in the paradigm.
Right.
So it forces you, yeah. But do you imagine, can you imagine that Bucky is writing this in 1980? He talked about reference of 1982, so he's writing 1983. Do you know when he died?
Yes.
A couple of years after this book.
87.
No,
85,
1983. He dies in 1983 and was 87. This guy is writing and thinking at this level at 87.
Yeah,
Oh,
I was
yes.
actually pretty amazed that I was
It
thinking about
is
that.
amazing. To me, it is amazing. And
Yeah.
all the problems that we have today, they are told here. I wouldn't say foretold, because it call it fundamental evolutionary patterning. So he understands what is going on at the bigger scale. And then he can tell local stories in very detailed ways. It is fascinating. To me, this book should be to everybody who want to have it.
But it's not easy reading.
No,
It is the easiest of Bucky's book.
Agreed.
That doesn't make it easy reading.
Yeah, that's like in the land of the blind.
Yeah, but
Like,
it must be taught. This thing must be taught.
I agree. I think that there are going through this with a group, we're fortunate. But some of the stuff he's communicating, I agree with you, Manu, it needs to be taught. But there are a lot of complex concepts being integrated into here.
Let me just share a story, some dates. Magna Carta, do you remember when it was?
14.
1000 something.
13th century. What did it involve? The
Fancy.
king and the rising power of the merchants. Then Gothenburg, when was it?
One?
The what?
The what?
Gothenburg, with the
Gutenberg.
printing machine.
The Gutenberg was 18 something or 7.
No, 1450, 15th
14th
century. Then you have Drake. Then you have Queen Elizabeth. That is now royalty and merchants are using the powers of royalty, the power of the political established, and the power of money to make a cartel. And then you have every other important. I mean, the consequence of that, in actual fact, is you can say that the revolution in the US was just a logical consequence of the fundamental evolutionary trait. In that you've got this expansion of humans on planet deployment. Bucky calls it deployment. Then they arrive and they got to be organized in a certain way. That is, the laws of yesterday reinforced as laws of today and uses masses. The US revolution is about taxation. It's not about some idealistic stuff. It was the US, the farmers in the US wanted to have the same rights as those in London, left in London. And they couldn't have those rights. And as a consequence, it was just tax, tax, tax. Am I saying too much?
No, I was saying goodbye to Anne.
So it was about taxation. It's always been about that. It has always been about protection, insurance, taxation, military. It's always, that is our story in this world.
That's a really deep point.
And thus the importance of studying history. I realized it too late, not too late, late. But it is so important, it's so powerful.
Oh yeah.
To study history. As Anne left.
Yeah. She had a muscle issue, she reports.
Yeah.
Okay, and I noticed that this fundamental evolutionary patterning, which first was bigger and bigger, using more and more, like more slaves and more machines, finally turned around, and until this mammoth peak, in which evolutionary production got ever more effective, and that's where, and then he draws the parallel between the Model T being developed, and then the Cadillac using more and more, and then waning to the 1980 Japanese Honda, which, and the Volkswagen, I think he would say too, which kind of took over doing more with less. Okay, we got about 20 minutes left here. Let's see what's left here with this thing. For example, yeah, he's going to continue on for a little bit. So this is probably, let me see here. This is probably, we can finish this last paragraph, because then he goes into 4 examples. So he's continuing on with this.
Yeah, okay. For example, transocean traffic brought into use ever more gargantuan ocean liners, leading eventually to the 5-day Atlantic crossing leviathans, such as the 81,000-ton Queen Mary and her sister ship, the Queen Elizabeth. Using the Second World War technology's new lightweight, high-strength, saltwater impervious aluminium alloys in her superstructures, the SS United States was built to carry the same number of passengers and the same amount of cargo and to cross the Atlantic at the same speed as the Queen Mary, though weighing only 45,000 tons, that is 55% of the weight of the Queen's. Wow. It's a great example of ephemeralization.
Yeah.
These 5-day Atlantic crossing passenger carriers are now obsolete. In 1961, 3 jet airplanes outperformed the SS United States in carrying capacity in hours instead of days and at less expense. In 1980, ever lighter, swifter, liner-type steamships are being built, but only for luxury cruise ships. For 20 years, these obsolete ocean liners have been progressively replaced by 10 to 30-ton, 1/3 of a day at transatlantic crossing jet aircraft. Another example of the little to big to little evolution is manifest in the world of mathematical computing. In developing trigonometry and its solution by algorithms, thousands of monks worked for hundreds of years to produce the 1-degree tables of sines, cosines, tangents, and cotangents. During the Great Depression years of 1930 to 1936, the British and German mathematicians were hired by their governments in a joint project to calculate the table of functions to a 1 minute of arc magnitude. Then came the big post-World War II calculating machines, UNIVAC et al., filling whole university buildings with thousands of thermionic tubes. Then came the tubeless transistor and computers weighing and bulking far less, until we came to printed circuits and chips and tabletop equipment doing better work than the whole building filling equipment. Before all this, I myself spent 2 pre-calculator or computer years carrying out the trigonometric calculations for geodesic domes. I had to do so longhand. Then appeared 75-pound electric calculating machines, followed by the pocket-sized computers with which the trigonometric problems that took me 2 years of work became solvable in 1 day by one person. Yeah. This process promises within a few years to become so miniaturized and yet so comprehensively capable as to be the size of a hearing aid. They're able to interact with all the world around computers and able to discern how best to operate our planet, making obsolete the opinions of corporate or government executives.
Let's pause there, because it seems like he's drawn a summary and then he's going to go back and say after World War II and talk about mergers and acquisitions, where we'll pick up next time.
Should be interesting.
What's that?
That should be interesting.
Yeah. So let's, if everybody's okay.
Can I comment?
That's what we're doing. Take some comments or questions before we close it out.
Yeah. I just think that is coming down to the fundamental problem that is had. And a famous statement, that of final examination of the individual. Because the question here is that we seem to be like victim of an evolution that is unstoppable. It is, can we handle what these things are yielding? Can we, as humans, handle? Hence, a question about why we are here. And hence, the statement that we are in final examination. And hence, the definition of the role of our role here as local problem solvers. He said, more than that, he said, winnowers of information. That is, we transceivers. And then we are local problem solvers in service, I'm thinking something like in service of the integrity of the eternally regenerative universe. I think it says something in these words. So you see, I could see that in the last paragraph where we stopped. Can we handle what is being yielded by this trend? And do we grasp what it means? And how do we face this situation locally at the risk of the extermination of our kind? Is it something that you read also?
Do I read that?
Yeah, in what he said.
Well, you're kind of projecting how where he's gonna continue with this line. I sure hope so.
I think actually, if you're incorporating some of the other things that we learned with Bucky, as well as Bucky, Manu, I do agree with that. I don't think it was necessarily clear in the past two paragraphs, though.
Yeah.
I think that this is your knowledge, and I only know it, and because I've been fortunate enough to be around you. What you're talking about right now. So, I agree. I agree with what you're saying.
Right on.
Another reason to be grateful.
Yeah. So with that, Manu, do you want to, I think you kind of projected there, but if you want to go ahead, how you feeling and what's your takeaway today?
I'm feeling hopeful. I've discovered, I've said it here many times. I've discovered the importance of history in education. If you start studying history properly in what it is, in a way, studying type of things that Bucky is the storytelling that is has here, and you understand the macro, the rules of universe, then we stand a better chance. You stand a chance individually to really play your role and then manifest your destiny. If not, it's very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really grateful to be part of this Hugh Hood. Let me put it that way. Hugh
What do you
Hood.
call it?
Hugh Hood.
Okay, I got
Hugh,
the
Hugh Hood.
Oh, you who?
No, like brotherhood. Hugh
Oh,
Hood.
brotherhood. Okay. All right. I got that.
Yeah, really.
I like that.
And really what I learned here is huge. And it makes me appear sometime when I'm in other places as a fool. I mean, but I come out every time of this thing, whether on Sunday or Wednesday. I come out with a feeling that I've grown, with a feeling that I've at least turned something of what was that I thought I'd grasped. I didn't grasp it. It was different. So, it's showing me another facet of it, another dimension. And all the time, it's so interesting. So that's what I take away, is that learning. And I really, really love that it's been shared, especially with the youth, for them to stand better chances of doing better than we did or we are doing. So that's what I take away. Susan, how do you feel? What do you take away?
I feel like I get something different out of Bucky's material every single time that we go over it. And so it's been 15 years ago that I read this the first time, and I appreciated it because it was so precise, because it was Bucky's last book, because I thought in some ways it was even more clear than Critical Path. And yet, you know, kind of looking back at those relationships and how they have the progression of those relationships into current time, I guess I have to take Bucky's side of this and say they're really trying to come at this whole structure head on and trying to be confrontational about it. We're not going to regulate the humans in this pattern. We're not going to regulate the banks, the government structures, the corporations. What's really going to come out of this is design science that is just so obviously favorable that it's the next logical thing, and it's going to be a process of attraction rather than blowing up, attracting into new structures rather than blowing up old structures. And I can't say that makes me hugely hopeful, because I wish I was smarter at doing that and making it more applicable for people, but I believe it can happen. John, how are you feeling and what are you taking away?
I've enjoyed going back into history. I always enjoy that, looking back at where we've come from and watching the progression. I like to be optimistic. I'm perhaps becoming more cynical with the years. I think Bucky did too, about the willingness of governments and corporations to work together for the overall well-being of people. Just looking at the latest problems in Turkey and Syria and all the human problems that stand in the way of us working together to help those who've been caught up in the natural disaster. You know, the problems of the infighting within Syria and the problems in Turkey. I mean, if ever there was a great opportunity for the world to work together, it's a natural disaster like that, where millions of people are involved. But once again, you know, there's only one border crossing and the problems of vehicles being turned back with aid, and it is frustrating and concerning. So, yeah, feeling less optimistic than I'd like to be. That's how I feel at the moment. So, who have we got left? Really?
Joe.
Joe, yeah.
Oh, you're the lucky last, Joe. So, Joe, how are you feeling, and what do you take out of today?
I've actually taken a lot of reading and some re-engagement that I need to do with history. I don't think that until you really fully understand history, especially of markets, that design becomes very impossible without understanding like the origins of why things evolved the way they have in the first place. So understanding that and kind of going through this book, I think is a really helpful balance to our Wednesday group. I think that our Wednesday group goes over some of the geometry, and that this is some of the history and the context that we can start to combine the two. And so I'm very grateful for everybody spending time on this call. And so you know, those are my major takeaways. I also, just thinking about energy and markets and nature, all three of those and how they interact with one another, and what does it mean to really have a regenerative system. And a regenerative system does not necessarily have to include paper money. So I'm still thinking about that and how that works. I'm also interested, I'll tell you the truth, in the future of finance. I think that we're hitting on some major points here. When John was talking about the deal that where the real estate deal where the essentially the financial institution, whatever it wasn't an institution, formal institution, but it was a financial backer, and the individual that was actually managing the project working together in a cooperative way. I think we're seeing that become the new model. And I think that that's that has positives and negatives. I think that, you know, there's in the sense that venture capital is essentially that, you know, these in certain ways, they take a stake in the company, they have a lot of money behind them, and it's kind of a joint venture. And I think that that's where a lot of innovation comes from, to be quite honest. It doesn't come from banks, doesn't come from traditional financial institutions. And I think we're at a place where we're evolving towards those types of deals more than ever. And I think there are positives and negatives to that. So anyway, that's what my takeaway. Steve, how do you feel, and what are your takeaways?
Well, I'm real honored to be here, and I want to apologize for my computer being a little hypersensitive on stuff. And that just threw me off a little bit with the thing. I'll tell you, I just put a little thing about insurance in Babylonia in 1800 BC, 4,000 years ago. And I'm still convinced that the concept of insurance started in a communal aspect before there were even big city states. John, I've got I study sovereignty.
Sovereign individual.
Sovereignty is one of my major conversations. Most people have no concept of what this word means. And you know, the Constitution of the US, you know, talks about, or the Declaration of Independence talks about we the people, you know, having these inalienable rights, which basically they were just standing in the face of the king saying, we got it, you know, whatever you got, we got. And so I'm going to read your book. I got it on.
Have you read it? You haven't read it before?
No, I got it just because
a fascinating read by two very, very clever, written by two very, very clever men.
Yeah.
Who stepped back. One was the editor of the London Financial Times, and the other is a British lord. And they, as I say, they go back and look into history as how we got to where we are now, and they look at what you require to be completely independent and to be a sovereign individual, to be beyond the reach of the powers of governments.
Yeah. And I don't know, I held it up there, but I'm going to actually take a second here. And the cover is really unique because it shows a guy sitting out at the end of this branch, dangling out here, as if sovereignty holds with it some sense of jeopardy. So, you know,
this is a newer edition. This is a newer edition to the one I've read.
Oh, I think it's just a different.
No, this mastering the transition to the information age.
Oh, this is a second version.
So this is an update of the original sovereign individual.
Oh, well, crud, I've got the update book then. I don't have the original book. That frustrates me.
Right. Yeah. It's been around a long time.
And it should be a good read anyway, because it'll take all the principles and adapt them. So I'm into the sovereignty thing. And I ultimately think that that's what Bucky's about. You know, he's this undying hope that individuals will learn how to take care of themselves. They'll learn how to work with nature, and we'll have a community that promotes that kind of regenerative reassurance for everybody. And I see a lot of that happening now with the internet. I see, you know, social media. I see people living in their own little worlds, and and while that's happening, there's this corporations are just going crazy. One day or another, something's going to happen someplace. So I'm looking forward to it. That's why I'm writing my book on meditation, because I think that's the only problem. Unless people look in, they won't see it. If they're looking out, they're going to get involved in all sorts of external conflicts. And when I look in, then I determine what a value is and what I value. When I come from what I value, I see what you value, and I respect you because I respect me. That's where I think. So anyway, I'm excited to read this. And hopefully I'll clip a few chapters before next week on this thing with everything else I'm doing, but we'll see. All righty. So thank you. Appreciate you all for your patience, and look forward to next week.
Thanks all.
You bet.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Wow,
No.
Steve.
Yeah.
You mentioned meditating.
Yeah.
And I say, you're teaching people to learn to step aside.
Yeah.
They step aside, watch, and join again. And that is the timing.
Ah,
Yep. You need to have time for contemplation,
that's right.
for stepping aside, intro and extra, but
Yeah.
you are just the in-between.
The in-between, the space between nows.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you choose which side of the flow you get in, knowing that you're going to circumnavigate. You understand?
Yeah.
Becky used the word circumnavigation.
Yeah.
You say the real, you call that ship what?
Gallant.
Yeah, the gallant.
Yeah.
What do you call it?
Gallant.
Magellan's ship circumnavigated the world.
Gallant. And his point was that you had to put together resources from around the entire freaking planet to make a single boat that could actually circumnavigate.
Yeah, that was cool. I love that about
and then that, so that is, you build the pattern first.
Right.
By trying errors, going until you complete one cycle. Right? So once. Now you can start going and learning more and establishing new patterns.
And it will
so
become.
Remember that, for example, rafters, they use rafters just to reach that side where the mountain appeared. Right? The first one was to escape the island, the coral, and go around. Then you see land somewhere. That's where you want to land to see what is in there. There's fresh water because you can see stream coming, you're in there. So there's fresh water, you start looking. So you engage completely locally into, harnessing those resources. It becomes your home. Unknowing to you that you are going to go on land while there's still activity that is going at sea, and then you're also going to join that sea. And that's when you have the cycle.
Right on.
So the herdsmen, the giants, and all of those are just segments of the same story. That's why I say, to me, I realized late in age that history is so fundamental. It doesn't depend what angle the history is taught, because if you learn the general laws, you'll be able to perceive the bias, because some history is not going to match the way the general law, the general principle is applied. And if it doesn't match, you say, this narrative is not correct. Let's look further to see if there's another narrative that matches this, because the general principle, by definition, is that it's true everywhere. So in every local situation, that general principle always prevails.
Cool. So Susan, did you get your point out? Oh, she just left. All right. See you, everybody.
Hey, good night.
That's cool.
Good night, all.
Yes.